Coming up, it seems one of the planet's most biodiverse water systems is in grave danger.
We might lose species before they're even known to science.
Fish farming and hydropower dams threaten hundreds of species in Asia's Mekong River.
How does one go about saving this river?
A key question is the benefits of hydropower to mitigation. How do you balance them?
A British activist documents years of Just Stop Oil protests. It's a look behind the slogans and the faces of environmentalism.
What is worth more, art or life?
And for Earth Hour 2024, special one-hour events are happening across the globe. We check in with two countries that have unique climate concerns.
Our country is vulnerable first because of its geographic position.
I think that happens when things start getting rough, or we need to unite people that are usually not united.
Just 2 degrees is on. Now.
Can an hour change the planet? Maybe not, but if you multiply that hour over millions of people that are doing the same thing on the same day, probably you can make a big impact.
There's a river that's home to as many as 1,700 fish species across 6 countries in East and Southeast Asia. It's the Mekong River, and it flows along 5,000 kilometers from the Tibetan Plateau to the South China Sea. Well, the World Wildlife Fund is warning that a fifth of those species now face extinction due to unsustainable development. Threats include converting wetlands for raising crops and fish farming, sand mining, invasive species, climate change, and hydropower dams that cut the flow of the river and its tributaries. And even more species could be under threat, as the conservation status of nearly 40% of Mekong fish species is unknown.
I understand there are species, so many of them, species in the Mekong yet to be discovered. Can you help us firstly understand the importance of this huge water system?
The Mekong is one of the rivers in the world that hosts the most number of fish species. It is third in the world, just after the Amazon and the Congo, both of them being larger river, much larger river than the Mekong. So in terms of area of length of kilometer of river, the Mekong ranks probably first in the world in the number of species it hosts, many of which are not yet known to science. So if you want to give your name to a fish, the Mekong is the river you need to head towards.
And talk about its importance to human livelihoods.
It's also a river where people are so dependent on the river for the resources, notably food intake, protein intake. So the relation between the people in the river is fantastic. It's a great example of the symbiosis between people and their river. They really worship the river because they really depend on the river.
Yeah, and of course it passes through 6 countries: China, Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. Considering it passes through so many countries, and these countries don't all have the same climate goals, how does one go about saving this river?
It adds to the challenge, obviously, but you can also see it as an opportunity. The fact that those countries have a shared river and thus a shared interest in managing it is also an opportunity, and they have gathered around the Mekong River Commission in order to do so. But yes, international rivers are more difficult to manage. The countries downstream tend to be more inclined to engage because they have more stakes and more to lose. But yes, it is a challenge, but at the same time, in the developing world, the Mekong is one of the countries in one of the basins that has a relatively well-functioning river basin organization.
Based on my reading, I understand hydropower development is having major impacts on the river, which I guess is a sort of a double-edged sword, because there are moves to increase renewables, but these projects are having such a devastating effect on this ecosystem. Is there even a solution for this?
Power obviously has benefits, and energy is needed for development, and also many of the hydropower projects are promoted in a climate logic for mitigation of climate change. So that makes sense from that perspective. But if you look at the same hydropower projects and the impact to fishes and food, that's a different story. And if you add this, the impact on climate adaptation, that's even another challenge.
In October, a man by the name of Gianluca Grimalda made climate headlines when he was sacked by his employer because he refused to return to the office via airplane from Papua New Guinea to Germany. Well, Gianluca worked for the Kiel Institute for Worldwide Economy as a climate researcher. We tracked him down to get his side of the story.
Well, the judge did not recognize slow travel as a valid reason not to be back in Kiel at the request of my institute. So the judge, in a way, recognized that the institute was not right in the immediate termination of my contract because he offered as a compromise solution to give me 2 months worth of salary. So that meant that at least he recognized that I was partly right. But in the end, he explicitly said that if your employer tells you that you have to be back at your workplace in 5 days, you cannot take 6 weeks. So that was what he explicitly said. So in a way, yeah, he didn't recognize slow travel and the willingness to minimize carbon emissions as a valid reason to delay my travel.
Just clear this up for me, Gianluca. Had you discussed slow traveling with your company prior to your departure for the Bougainville archipelago in the Pacific? If so, what was that discussion like?
In the end, when I presented that with my travel, so I said that yes, I understand that the urgency of me coming back. I can reasonably return by slow travel in 6 weeks. And they said, no, you have to come back in 5 days. And actually, I mean, there are many things that are, I would say, paradoxical, but they wanted to force me on boarding on a plane. But in that week, there were no planes in the island where I was. But still, in the end, they wanted me to take a ship, but they didn't want to give me the itinerary. So it was very confusing. So they kept on telling me, you can be here on Monday, 2nd of October, whereas that was not true, in fact, because there were no planes. They made up that there is a ship that would travel from the island where I was to the capital of Papua New Guinea, but there has never been a ship traveling that way. They tried to force me to basically renege on my principles. So I think in the end, maybe they just wanted to diminish my commitment to the environmental cause by forcing me on a plane.
Yeah, Gian, you said that the company wrote a, quote, large amount of untruthful things in their legal response. Give an example of, I guess, what you think would be the biggest lie that was told.
Something that I really cannot see how they can, even in court, they made this claim. So they said that I wasn't working for them in the period between the 21st of July up to the end of September. Because, I mean, formally in that period, I was supposed to already be on my way back. So I had taken, on the basis of their request, holiday and then unpaid leave. So what they say is that, Grimalda was on holiday, so he cannot work for us. But in fact, I never went on holiday because my research was delayed. And I have 20 pages of correspondence with my direct supervisor in which we talk about a new project that we started together. I talk about statistical analysis. And I simply cannot believe that they can ignore this evidence. I cannot believe that they have not spoken with my supervisor, who must have confirmed that I was working with him.
Indonesia's natural resources, coal, nickel, palm oil, rainforests, matter to the rest of the world. And so does who leads the Southeast Asian country. Environmentalists say the management of the country's natural resources could have a significant impact on the world's ability to stave off the worst of climate change. Official results show the new government will be led by a man named Prabowo Subian. Here's a look at Mr. Prabowo's track record and how he could influence Indonesia's climate commitments.
Kondisi parkiran terkini, motor pada jatuh.
These were scenes from Indonesia's West Java district in early March, after heavy showers redirected the flow of the Sesanggarung River.
Berantakan Pak, saya. Loh, perabotan saya pada terbalik semua. Saya kagak bisa tidur.
Flooding posed a clear challenge for these people, who struggled to escape the moving tides. Global warming has made storms in Indonesia significantly more intense. This one downed trees, damaged homes and shopping centers. But bad weather in February didn't stop people hitting the polls, hoping their ballots would address the rising cost of living, unemployment, and corruption. For younger voters, the most important issues were as clear as this cloudy day. Activists rallied in Jakarta ahead of voting day, demanding national focus on democracy and climate change.
Hak asasi manusia dan juga mempunyai catatan terhadap berbagai isu demokrasi dan kemudian juga isu lingkungan dan yang lain-lain.
Prabowo Subianto's election triumph wasn't great news for environmentalists. Many have called out the former defense minister for having close ties to the coal and palm oil industries. The local mining watchdog Jatim says Prabowo owns at least 2 companies related to mining and 5 in the plantation sector. And groups are worried that with him in charge, it'll mean more coal consumption and exports and weaker commitments to tackle deforestation.
The circle of Prabowo is coal mining and oil and gas mining. For climate policy, we worry about the policy of energy transition in Indonesia. Prabowo also have a program about the green energy from palm oil. I think it's very problematic. Potential increase of expansion of oil palm plantation in forest. I think it's deforestation rate increase in Indonesia.
Indonesia is ranked among the top 10 emitters of greenhouse gas emissions. It's the world's largest exporter of coal and sold more palm oil in 2023 than Malaysia, Guatemala, Papua New Guinea, and Colombia combined. Palm oil is used in everyday products like soap and ice cream, and producing it requires clearing vast amounts of land. Satellite images revealed scores of companies cleared more than 3,000 hectares of forests in 2023.
Some see climate activists as villains, others see them as heroes, but they see themselves as concerned citizens risking their freedom and even their lives to put a stop to more than 130 new oil and gas projects in the United Kingdom. I spoke with filmmaker Felgate about his latest documentary. It's a deep dive into the group Just Stop Oil's activism and the sometimes controversial tactics they use.
This isn't about popularity. It's about opening up conversation and getting people's attention.
I think what you're doing is the right cause, so I just hope you're doing it the right way. And I think it's a shame.
So Rich, let's start with the name of your film, Why Everything is Fine.
Everyone knows we've got this massive catastrophe ahead of us, the climate collapse, which threatens to result in the collapse of civilization. But if you step outside most places in the world, you wouldn't believe it because everything's carrying on as if everything's fine. So the film kind of tries to draw that to attention by following the people who are acting as if everything isn't fine and are taking matters into their own hands as if life depends on it, because it does.
Yeah, I agree with you. As a filmmaker, you spend a lot of time observing people, how they move, how they react to conflict, how they react to the message from environmentalists. What kinds of honest reactions have you observed from all the non-activists, including the police?
There's this trope that the public are very, very against these protests, whereas I think it's a small minority who are very, very vocally opposed and, will
have very strong reactions to disruptive protests where, they'll even, there's been instances of protesters being attacked. But I think, there's this huge spectrum where some people are very supportive. Some people are very anti-climate protests, but I think deep down, most of us, everyone knows that we can't continue this this way of life. So that manifests in different ways. Some people want to hear the message. Some people hear the message and support it, and then there's a lot of people in the middle who I think don't really know what to do, how to deal with it. And what I've been filming is an intervention into that. It's starting these conversations. What are we going to do? How are we going to stop fossil fuels, etc.?
And what about the police? They're always often quite stoic. Have you seen any other reactions from them that will give you an indication as to whether they support, personally, whether they support or not support climate activism?
Climate collapse is going to affect everyone, including the police. They're the ones who are going to have to deal with how starving people react when there's no food in a world of 2 degrees heating. But often, they're paralyzed with the demands of their position as the police. They have to be subservient to the orders of their higher ups. But I think, personally, I think that's not an excuse for allowing this huge act of injustice and suffering to happen. We've seen that the worst atrocities in humankind are made possible by good people doing nothing, by not speaking out, by being afraid to disobey authority. And it's heartbreaking that we're seeing that with climate collapse.
In your trailer, you say we can't rely on the billionaire press to effectively communicate the climate crisis. How do you think organizations like Just Stop Oil could win against big money?
I think, as this is beyond Just Stop Oil. It's anyone that wants to see a change in the world. It's not gonna be handed down to us on a plate, and part of that is telling the stories that are going to change the world, that are going to tell the truth. So that's what I'm doing with this film. I'm not waiting around for the gatekeepers of the media to tell this story for me. I'm doing it myself. So running a crowdfunding campaign for the film on Indiegogo. It's called Everything is Fine. And I'm calling on people who want the truth to be out there about what's really happening with these protests, who these people that are labeled as eco-zealots, who they really are. People who want that story to be told, please support the crowdfunding campaign, and that's how we'll do it.
Earth Hour is organized by the World Wildlife Fund, a global grassroots organization uniting people to take action to protect our planet. Last year, a record 410,000 hours were given to our planet by supporters in over 190 countries and territories. We spoke with organizers in Ecuador and Cameroon about what they've planned for the day and the challenges each country faces in fighting the climate crisis.
Our country is vulnerable first because of its geographic position. Cameroon has an access to the sea, to the ocean. So any increase in the sea level will probably affect the people living in coastal areas.
Ecuador particularly has a big challenge because it's one of the hotspots of biodiversity in its Amazon region. We have been working with local governments and national government in order to strengthen those policies.
Climate change is a serious threat to Cameroon. It's expected to exacerbate poverty and inequality, food insecurity, possibly lead to population displacement. Why exactly is Cameroon so vulnerable?
Compared to developed countries, we don't have the necessary means to combat the adverse effects of climate change, especially the drought, the heavy rainfalls, and all the consequences that can affect the crops and other livelihoods of our populations.
What do you say to people who look at you in your face and say, take off lights for an hour, learn how to recycle plastic, that does nothing, I'm not doing Earth Hour? What do you say to them?
When I say, can an hour change the planet? Maybe not, but if you multiply that hour over millions of people that are doing the same thing on the same day, probably you can make a big impact.
Earth Hour in Cameroon is not just about a campaign, it's a movement.
The main population that was attracted to Earth Hour was the youth. And actually most of our activities for Earth Hour are being led by youth communities here in Ecuador.
Our aim is to spark environmental activism among our youth, with the objective of inspiring collective action and fostering a culture of environmental stewardship.
To unite different people, different organizations around one common objective, which is to we are doing 4 cleanup projects around the country on March 23rd.
To empower a total of 60,000 youths to advocate against deforestation and to seize the opportunity to plant and nurture trees. So we are partnering with a platform called Carton Rouge, in English, the red card, to mobilize students and school authorities.
Here in Ecuador, it's called Minga. Minga is basically an activity that gathers many people from different sectors to one single objective. And that is very common in South America, and mostly on countries from Inca descendants, that the Mingas are part of our culture. So a Minga happens when things start getting rough, or we need to unite people that are usually not united. So the Minga concept around Earth Hour is very powerful because that is what Earth Hour is all about.
Instead of simply switching off lights, we directly involve over 200,000 youth from schools across 5 regions of the country, along with indigenous communities, in physical awareness raising meetings, tree planting, sport walks, clean up campaigns, and more.
Just last year, 410,000 hours were given to the planet. That means 46 years of actions towards the planet. So yeah, if we are talking about the biggest grassroots movement around the world that is happening in over 190 countries and territories, of course, it can make a difference. And I think that is the strength around Earth Hour.
Juan, I just want to point at my producer here. His name is Mikhail. I would like to ask him on camera, Mikhail, what do you think of Juan's message?
I think Juan has convinced me that Earth Hour is worth every 60 minutes.
We have a convert. Juan, we have a convert here at CO2 Studios. Thank you so much for your time, Juan. It was fantastic speaking with you.
You too as well. Thank you for the space.
Well, we started the show with the threat of extinction for fish in the Mekong. But we leave you with the sights and sounds of life and culture along its beautiful and vital riverbanks.